Welcome to the Life's Best Medicine podcast, where we are finding hope and healing one episode at a time. No appointment needed, no rubber gloves, and no coping. Just a healthy dose of life lessons to help equip you for this wild journey we call life. Hey everyone, this is a friendly reminder that we are here for entertainment purposes only. We may not even be that entertaining at times, but this is not medical advice. Talk to your doctor, check with your healthcare professionals before making any lifestyle changes or medicine changes. What we're talking about is our clinical experience and what we've seen. And so if you really want our advice, you can consult us. You can actually consult me as a doctor, or you can consult my guest and get all your questions answered. But we can't give free medical advice because we can't pay our bills with that, but we can help to educate you a bit and allow you to think a little bit. And always reach out to your medical professional before making any lifestyle changes. Thank you. Here we go. It's March. We're getting closer to the holidays again. I know there are distant memories right now, but it's coming up. So I'm just giving you a fair warning. Don't say I didn't warn you. I want to thank my sponsors for bringing this episode. I'm really excited about some of the episodes coming up, and they are making it possible for you. So please support them. Health Code, Get Health, GETHLTH.com, Great Vanilla Shakes, and Chocolate Macadamia. And they have tons of other ones like you can add in peppermint to make a little peppermint shake to remember the holidays again, or whatever you want to do. They have tons of recipes on their website, so go check them out. Really honored to be sponsored by them. And of course, Keto Mojo, my go-to for checking ketones and glucose levels, double checking the continuous glucose monitors that could be off. And again, I would recommend going to their website. They have tons of resources, old talks, keto talks and metabolic health talks. And they're doing a lot for the community, and they really, really do give back. So enjoy this episode, and please give my sponsors a shot if you haven't already. Thank you. Hello, and welcome back to the Life's Best Medicine podcast. Today, I brought on a guy more talented and smarter than me. He's done a lot of stuff. I just watched his documentary, and we just kind of were able to connect through mutual friends, and it's kind of crazy how the world works sometimes. So John Davidson, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Brian.
No, thanks for coming on. So brokentruth.com.
Yeah, right. So brokentruth.com has kind of been where we've staged the fight against the misinformationists in some instances, and also just tried to, show people how to do their own Freedom of Information Act requests, or at least, what you can research. And really just we've explored medical fraud, and not just medical fraud, but other types of fraud, because I've really noticed in the last, and maybe it was always there and I just was oblivious to it, but the last decade really has seen an explosion in just fraudulent behavior, and it's become the norm. And when the medical industry took control of the country in 2020, that sort of predicated this effort of mine and others to, call it out.
Yeah, give people your background of what your professional background is, what you were doing before 2020, and what brought you to this point.
Yeah, so my career started out at in local radio in South Georgia, and then I went off to CNN and was a video journalist there for a few years, an editor, and then I chose to go off into the entertainment side because that's definitely more profitable, and moved to California, started a company, and had a pretty great experience with a lot of different networks and studios. And met some amazing TV stars and movie stars, and had a pretty good life. And then 2020 happened, and I tried to help doctors. I tried to do the public service announcements. I was part of the group of people that made the videos to tell you to stay home very early on, like some of the first ones. So that was, I guess I'm doing penance for that now, because that effort kind of metamorphosized into this censorship platform, where everywhere you went, or not even a censorship platform, but really a propaganda platform under the guise of public health. And That's been something I've been trying to expose in a new documentary called Epidemic of Fraud. And you can see it at epidemicoffraud.com. And you can also sign up at Broken Truth to get a link to screen it, or as I'm calling it, maybe now a pre-release screener for potential investors or whatever you want to call it. So you can go now and see that film, and that's been where most of my work has been. And that film documents the early days of COVID as well as the history of hydroxychloroquine, the drug that was associated with Donald Trump and then slandered and defamed, however you want to put it, to the point where people were terrified to use it. And so what this documentary also does is it goes through the studies used to justify the refusal of pharmacists and hospitals to prescribe this medication that comes from an ancient class of medications that are actually based off the first infectious disease medication ever, which was quinine.
Yeah, and you do a remarkable history of that, talking about how wars, we had wars over this stuff, and how important it was to the war effort, and just for fighting malaria, and it's amazing to me. It was amazing to me at the time because we've used it for rheumatoid arthritis, and some autoimmune diseases, and no one ever questioned it ever. Not one time ever in my 20-year career did anyone ever say, "Why are you prescribing this drug?" And then all of a sudden, as soon as this became political, we had to justify every time we wanted to use it.
Right. I love. I mean, this history of hydroxychloroquine is fascinating to me because once you realize that this class of medications has been restricted repeatedly throughout the last 400 years, so that, for example, the Spanish had most of the control of supply of cinchona bark, which is where the original quinine came from. The Spanish would restrict it in the 1700s based on who they wanted to win wars. So if the British were going somewhere that the Spanish didn't like, well, the Spanish wouldn't sell them any quinine, and the British would be sick, and a sick army is an army less likely to win. So when you understand it through the lens of history and warfare, what happened in 2020 takes on a certain darker tone. And I think, and my probably the biggest feedback that I get, because we start off with really this history, and I think people say, I'm 15 minutes in and I'm mad as hell. I'm 15 minutes in, I'm so pissed off, because once you see it, it becomes very apparent that a lot of these people knew that this medication was beneficial. Now you could pick a point the part that maybe hydroxychloroquine isn't specifically tailored for COVID, right? What it really is about how it affects your own immune response to any disease and any pathogen, right? It sort of downregulates your overreaction, right? Your cytokine system. And you could speak to that better.
Yeah, and that's what was killing people, is the cytokine storm. So, Sabine Hazen, who was in your film also, she was doing research using it, FDA approved, and then once Trump talked about it, the next day, cease and desist, no more research. And she was seeing people getting better, coming in with horrible saturations in the 70s, improving, going home the same day. And so it was for the rest of us, it was such a head scratcher to see, why is this so political? There's medication we've been using all these years, and then in some places that you could lose your medical license. I know people got arrested in Australia. You need to go, wow. Plants were burning down. I don't think you mentioned that in the film, but plants were burning down that were making this stuff. You go, why would that possibly be?
Right. Yeah, there are certain, I mean, you could even go back into 2019, I believe. It was a Canadian couple that owned a pharmacy that makes it, or a pharmaceutical company that makes it. They were murdered in their home, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And there's no explanation, I believe, to that even now. I think there's a reward out for anyone that can figure out what happened in that murder. But we can't, I can't speak to that. I've looked into that. I can't say it's associated. Could it have been an accident? Could have been Coincidence? Who's to say? I've had tips that said that this may have been in the works, that this COVID outbreak has been in the works since 2017. I can't substantiate those, and that's why it's not in the film. But there are a lot of rumors that come around when these things come out, and part of a job of a journalist or a documentarian or whatever else is to try to source and fact everything. So this film has over 300 sources, books, studies, articles, historical content, other films. I mean, there's a significant amount of information, and it's tremendous. And it's why it took me 4 years to make this film.
And what made you what inspired you to go like hydroxychloroquine and to make that the focus of your documentary? Like instead of sitting on your couch doing nothing, what inspired you to say, okay, this is not politically correct and I'm going after this like that, because those of us who are, this podcast was taken down 4 times for medical misinformation. Each time when I was interviewing one of the top doctors, like Peter McCullough, Brian Tyson, Sabine Hazen, Patricia Lee, who came out as a whistleblower early on. So how can they, and no one ever contacted me to ask me my sources, to see my chart notes, and so it's amazing when you have doctors talking about what they're seeing in clinic, and that's called medical misinformation and taken off the internet, the censorship.
Yeah, I think for me, initially I was 100% behind Fauci, the medical system, and anytime anybody said anything to me that contradicted that, I was one friend I didn't talk to for almost a year because we were so at odds about what was going on. And I said, "You are accusing them of murder. Just understand that." And then the Surgisphere study came out, and that was probably I agree. I was like, "Oh well, says it's deadly. We have to move on." Then George Floyd happened. And right after that, there was no news coverage of this retraction on this study that killed the drug, that slandered it to the point that no one would ever use it again, or hardly anyone would use it.
Yeah, tell people
And
about Surgisphere. Tell them a little background on that. That from my understanding, some doctors went around going, "Wait a minute, there's not even hospitals in the place you said they were reporting all these patients dying."
Right. So in May 22nd, a study came out from a company called Surgisphere that was co-authored by a very respected Harvard professor named Mandeep Mira and a few other surgeons, cardiologists, whatever. And it essentially showed this massive study across 96,000 patients in 6 continents. They love to put that out there for some reason. And 671 hospitals that said it was deadly, and it was a significant increase in the risk of death. It was like 30 or 40% increased risk. So that was run with by the news, and we already knew that the news, especially CNN and MSNBC, absolutely hated Donald Trump. And when he promoted this drug in March, and continuing on, every time he said it, they really went after him. Now, you have to understand, I worked in advertising significantly in my career, so I understand that advertising rules a roost. And when you understand that, I mean, that's literally what they said. Advertising calls the shots for what programming shows at the networks. And who's a big advertiser for Discovery? I'm sorry, for CNN, for MSNBC, all the news. Pharmaceutical companies. Pharmaceutical companies aren't going to profit off of the fear that had been generated by COVID on a half-a-cent pill. But they will profit on remdesivir. They will make significant amounts of money on investment into vaccine research. Trillions of dollars were poured out of the country, out of the United States, just to fight COVID and COVID response. That would be through, business propping up, through Paycheck Protection Program, through grants and loans and whatever else. However the country could help survive COVID and lockdowns, that's where that money went. So $11 trillion. That's a huge paycheck. and that's what they got. And so to do that, you had to get rid of any obstacles, especially early treatment, because as you know, emergency use authorization from the FDA has a condition that there be no available treatment for a disease.
Yeah, and these were published in major medical journals, and then retraction after retraction after retraction. After all the headlines and everyone, no one knows about the retractions because no one's talking about it. So when
Right.
I was seeing these things recurrently happening, you start thinking, okay, this is a generic drug. Why would anyone go out of their way to study it so extensively and then publicize like bad results? And then when you start looking at the studies, they use ridiculous doses, like 100 times the recommended dose or way under what the recommended dose was, and they waited till they were already on the ventilator, instead of saying, hey, early treatment pre-hospital, right?
Right. So you had other entities involved in the studies at the ground level. And I feel like there needs to be a study into studies that maybe were influenced by these big organizations that didn't want it to work. And when I say it didn't want it to work, like we've done FOIA requests, and since the film came out, we discovered that David Boulware, who conducted one of the studies from University of Minnesota, was in constant contact with the Gates Foundation, who was in contact with the WHO, who was in contact with multiple other studies going on all across the world. Now, I'm of the opinion, and not everyone maybe believes this, but if your organization has spent probably over $10 billion into vaccine development, are you eager to see a non-vaccine solution come from any study? And I think it's like jury tampering. You're not allowed to talk to the jury. You're not allowed to, interact with them. The prosecutor shouldn't be involved. The defense attorney shouldn't be involved. They should be sequestered. They should be, avoid the public whatsoever. But in this case, in David Boulware's case, he was tweeting about Donald Trump. He was online. He was very vocal in his sort of negativity towards the political aspect of this medication. And he was working with universities that had hundreds of millions of dollars in funds from Gates Foundation. And I believe that it would be very difficult for a third party to judge that as not having some influence on the outcome, especially when so many people disputed the results that he provided and his study. By his own admission in the emails that we recently discovered, he didn't even do their own PCR tests. PCR tests during this time of the study weren't even really available. There are also significant issues with the number of cycles used in PCR tests that could generate multiple false positives. So a lot of times people would get sick, and if they got any kind of symptom of sick, they called it COVID even when they didn't know it. So how could this study be of any benefit or use in any sort of decision-making process? Despite that, in his public press report or press release from the University of Minnesota, Boulware calls his results conclusive.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Also, like the Surgisphere, the World Health Organization called the halt to all testing, right, of hydroxychloroquine because they said it was too dangerous based on a fraudulent study. Then it gets retracted, but they never changed their recommendations, right?
Right. And we had to search really hard. So there was another component of this, and that was the HHS response and FDA. And we all learned about this little organization called BARDA that is operated by HHS. And they operate a bit like a Kickstarter for pharmaceutical companies. They develop new therapies, new technologies for any potential threat. BARDA, from the very beginning, first they wanted more money before they would help HHS with anything, despite the fact that they had $1.5 billion budget. They're also predominantly run by PhDs, not medical doctors. So there are going to be ethical issues that medical doctors are better trained for that these PhDs in making public health policy might not appreciate. When you take care of your patient, you know that patient's care is the foremost concern in your mind, or it should be. But with a PhD, it's all numbers. So it's not to say that PhDs aren't important and relevant to this world, but I believe that there were some significant conflicts of interest at BARDA right out of the gate. And also keep in mind, by January 1st, according to emails we found, by January 1st, Moderna was beginning work on their vaccine. I'm sorry, January 13th. So that's pretty incredible, considering most people hadn't even heard of coronavirus or COVID-19. It didn't even get a name at that point. So already they're trying to develop a vaccine. And we also have the head of BARDA, Rick Bright, with Anthony Fauci, and a former head of the FDA on a panel in October of 2019 discussing how to make an air of excitement around the next pandemic to really bypass all the rules and stuff. So it's all pointing to a direction of hamming it up to gin up some fear so they can get money. And they were so confident in this mRNA platform, they maybe believe their own BS. And it's turned out to be, in many instances, a disaster. So how does that?
Yeah, and I think that's the hard thing, especially coming from the background you have in media and pushing the agenda and then saying, wait a minute, something's wrong here. And you start realizing it. And that says a lot about your character too, because it's not easy when all your friends, 90% of people on the earth think you're insane or that you're a conspiracy theorist. We were called conspiracy theorists. And my take was like, look, this is a new technology. Let's wait and see. I was watching very fervently the data coming back from Israel and some of these countries who are really, really pushing it. And I was like, uh-oh, the data is not looking like it should, right?
No.
If this thing's working as well as it should, their numbers should have dropped like crazy. And when I was seeing that, it made me concerned. And then a lot of the potential risks that I was hearing from some of the world experts who weren't in the know, basically, they weren't in the, and then you say, well, we're taking, like you're saying, these guidance from people who never treated a patient with COVID.
Right.
Right. How many
And
people,
also,
COVID patients at Fauci or Hotez and these guys, how many do they treat? None.
I mean, at least Fauci has a medical degree. And I think Hotez also has a medical degree. That doesn't mean he's right about anything. But
well, you have a medical degree, but you're not treating patients like in the room with the patient, like
yeah.
The rest of us were seeing the patients in the room. And so these guys weren't, they were just making guidelines and they're a figurehead. It's different than someone like, Peter McCullough or Brian Tyson, who treated thousands of patients with excellent results. And you go, why aren't we talking to these guys? And that's what really made me concerned when I said, how come no one's talking to the doctors and seeing what are they seeing, what's working, what's not working? It was never done on a clinical basis where, Pierre Corey was talking about steroid use, and he goes, look, my people are not dying. They're not going on a ventilator because it was the cytokine storm, as we discussed, this massive inflammatory response. And when he was treating him, but it took him a year and a half or 2 years for them to even listen to him.
Right. This goes to a bigger thing. And I don't call it out like I am about to do here. We have created a weapon in this country, in this world, that is far deadlier and more powerful than even the nuclear bomb. And that is this media weapon that has been created, this media censorship weapon. Because if you look at what's occurred, billions of dollars were poured out across social media, television networks, whatever, under, I believe, the guise of community corps. And then on top of that, you had pharmaceutical advertising. You had nonprofit groups that were called like public good projects, which Lee Fang has brilliantly covered, which were part of the Twitter files. We've also covered them in a group called a website called shotsgate.com. We investigated and we had people within these private Facebook groups that we wanted to figure out how doctors were being targeted when they spoke out. Well, it was going on in private Facebook groups, and you'd have about 1,200 people in this one group called Shots Heard Around the World, and they would coordinate attacks on Mary Bowden, Dr. Mary Bowden in Texas, or Scott Miller, the physician assistant in Washington State, or Nicole Siratek, who testified as a whistleblower to Ron Johnson about remdesivir deaths in New York and other places. So that's how these guys were being targeted. That's just one area. There were others. There are a lot of very, very concerning groups on Facebook of these, I don't know, woke acolyte type people that are in the medical field who, based on some of the statements that they've made in these groups, probably should not be treating any patients at all. And we've covered a lot of this in shotsgate.com, which is part of Broken Truth. I suggest anybody who wants to get really angry, go there. We'll help. But the beast that they've created is this censorship system that anytime there's a voice that says this might not be a good idea, it's immediately shut down. The algorithms are triggered anytime the name of a person, like your name may get censored on YouTube. I've posted things with doctors that I interviewed or worked with, instantly shut down on YouTube. So in this system, if all that people hear is safe and effective, and they never hear any alternative concepts behind, maybe we should, if there's never a word of warning that's allowed in, this is pure brainwashing, pure programming. And only people who exist sort of outside of the mass media and social media could resist it, or people who just have sort of a predisposition towards skepticism.
Yeah, you look at, I think probably Joe Rogan influenced more people than anyone. Just
Right.
the guests he had on, that he had the courage, and they were demanding he be taken down, and you get these campaigns, and he was powerful enough and he had enough followers then, everyone knew it would be, suicide to get him off your platform.
Well, and members of Shots Heard Around the World were part of the, signatories for the letter that was sent to Spotify to remove Rogan, or at least to remove his certain podcasts where he talked about certain things they didn't like. And, and those, like, one of them is a guy from University of Manitoba who's received $300 million from the Gates Foundation. Tell me that doesn't have an influence.
Well, yeah, and you tell me the advertising. If you're sponsoring my show, I'm probably not going to say a lot of bad things about you, right? If I'm paying you to write my life story, you're not going to say bad things about me, or you're not going to get funding, right? So I think
Right.
it's those kind of things, and you realize how it works. And being in medicine for 20 years, I kind of saw some of these things. Someone like Jason Fung, for instance, that you had a lot of his stuff in the film, talking about the corruption that's out there. And there was a new drug class that came out for weight loss and for diabetes control. The week before, he was getting attacked left and right by these people on social media. Every single one of those people who are attacking him is pushing the drug now. Right. And when you see a concerted effort like that, like, we don't go out of our way just to attack people. But when you see something like, why would you just go like attack someone out of the blue for no reason? Right. And you start seeing how much funding is going, that people are paid for their tweets, or they're paid for their postings.
Right. You have to wonder, was so much of the censorship that we experienced censorship, or was it just we weren't paying the piper? We were not paying for the advertisement in conjunction with our messages to get out there.
Well, I think when you go against the narrative is the problem, right? So for me as a practicing doc, I saw six. I was on the campus of a college, and so I saw 6 students come in with COVID after being vaccinated, and I'm watching everyone on the news saying, "Hey, if you get the vaccine, you're not going to get it." I'm like, the problem is, the danger was that they thought they couldn't get it. They were sick, and they go, "I can't have COVID." If someone wasn't vaccinated and they were sick, they're like, "I'm not going. Like, I'll be a pariah of the country if I go and expose anyone." So these people believed that they couldn't get it, and they were 100% wrong when they were saying 100% effective. Oh, 95% effective. Okay, 92%. And there was never data for that.
Right.
But
And
those
and
videos
this,
still
yeah.
remain. They still remain on YouTube, because it's not about misinformation. It's saying if you're giving the message that's not popular.
Right. And that is a component of this weapon, this consensus weapon. I mean, this is probably going to have a positive effect for us in the future, because enough people now are aware of the BS and the garbage that has been spewed by science. Uh, if I'm a litmus test for what people are going to go through, or beta, if I was a beta tester for this awakening kind of experience, you're going to have a lot of anger, frustration, depression. Then you're going to have people beginning to question everything that we've been told. And maybe that's not a bad thing, but unfortunately, that might mean that certain things that, as a medical doctor, to be good and beneficial, those things are going to be questioned. And that's going to be frustrating. And I think that probably the best thing that we can do is encourage more people to do what I've done, which is to put out fact-based messaging and show the people the history. I mean, like I said, I've got a 300 plus source bibliography that's growing. I'm still adding to it. That you can, if you dispute a fact that I've stated in the film, you can go and see where my sources are. I really spend a lot of time just on that. And I wanted to make sure that whatever I said could be backed up. And if a controversial statement is made, it's not said by me, it's made by someone else. So that's been the real challenge. And I hope our society does do a better job of not instantly shutting down dissent. That is truly the death of any sort of democratic state.
And I hear that over and over. People would say, it's dangerous. Don't do your own research. That's dangerous, right? Don't look into the data. Don't let the experts tell you,
Pure gaslighting. That's what that
total
is.
gaslighting of people. And you go, when I saw that was my wake up call when I saw, Pierre Corey, Peter McCullough, all these guys saying the same thing, Jay Bhattacharya, you go, these guys these were the greatest scientists of all time. Now they're all crazy. Did they all lose their mind at the same time, or they just are the only ones with enough courage to stand up? And it's amazing how many people have finally started coming around. But it's such a, like, for instance, with your friend, was it hard for you to go back and go, oh my gosh, you were right all this time? Or did you go back and talk to him, or what happened with that?
I did, yeah. We reconnected, and I apologize. I was like, look, you're right. I mean, this story is not just a condemnation. It's also maybe my penance for my role in helping feed this beast. I did, like I said, and I don't know if maybe the stay home messaging that I put out there did help, because it does appear that hospitals were a very big part of causing deaths, just with terrible protocols. So by encouraging people not to get the flu or anything, they avoided the hospital system and weren't put through remdesivir treatment or lack of antibiotics or ventilation unnecessarily applied. There were things that were done that people have told me about that were in these hospitals that are that were not great. And we really do need to revisit our hospital systems and get them back on track. I think maybe we need some sort of FTC baby bell breakup of the hospital systems and the billing chains, especially HCA. Your big hospital chains. Maybe they shouldn't be so big. Maybe we need more doctors operating independently without a centralized medical directive. Because, for example, we wouldn't need a clinical trial to tell us if something was working. We would be able to, if you had 10 different hospitals that were doing 10 different protocols, you'd know which one was working. And that information would be exchanged. And then people would pick it up.
That's exactly how it works. That's exactly how it should work. Some of these docs are out there, like someone like Brian Tyson, instead of saying, oh my gosh, you have a 99% success rate or 100% success rate. He said, no one came to my clinic to evaluate what I was doing. No one questioned me. They threatened me. And then like, oh, here my patients are living. What do you want me to do? Like, everyone's getting better. So that's what was so frustrating, is by doing the right thing. And a lot of us, when they said, "Hey, wait till they turn blue and send them to the ER," I was like, what are we doing as primary? And in San Diego, where I'm from, they a lot of the doctors never saw patients for 2 years. They never went to the office again. In El Centro, I know, where Brian Tyson was, most of the doctors were saying, "We'll just talk to you on the phone." They weren't even doing Zoom meetings. They could just go to the ER. You're sick, go to the ER. And you go, that's a burden on the system. And then the problem becomes when you test every single person coming in the hospital with a broken leg or a major trauma, the more times you test people, as you're talking about with the PCR, you're going to get false positive testing. So they would test that same person 20 times in a row. I know people who are in the hospital for 2 weeks, tested negative consistently, and got discharged with a COVID pneumonia, presumed COVID pneumonia. Is like, because there was a financial stake,
Right. This
right?
is, I'm
Or to use
honestly,
remdesivir.
this has been this has been the most unbelievable scandal and one of the most profound scandals in human history. I think it's how I say it in the film, because of how many people died, or were put through torture, quite literally, forced on a ventilator. What's most amazing about all of this is that so many people are coming out of the woodwork. I feel a little bit like Indiana Jones in Temple of Doom when he lands in the Indian village that had all their children taken, and they surround him. They're like, I feel a little bit like that because so many people are telling me these stories of how they were abused by the system. One woman was a Baylor Hospital in Texas, and she was told she had COVID. She went in. A doctor told her, he asked if she was vaccinated. When she was unvaccinated, he said, "Well, I'm sorry to tell you, but you're going to die." Who does that? And they were then trying to force her onto a vent. She's calling her husband desperate, saying, "Get me out of here. They're going to try to kill me." Luckily, they had some political connections, but he had to break into the hospital and get her out of there.
Oh,
And
it happened. Dr. Bowden had happened too. They went after her, and it was one after another. And the point is, 80% of doctors work for a big organization, right? They're not independent. And so the problem is if you speak out, you say the wrong thing, first of all, you're going to lose bonuses. That's one thing. The other thing is you're going to get fired, and you have $400,000 worth of medical school loans. Because I've reflected on that. I thought, gosh, if I was in this system, would I be able to speak out and tell what I was seeing in clinic and tell the truth? And so ultimately, it's like, you know what? If they go after me for that, then I'll find another career path, because I can't be a doctor if I can't use medical ethics. And the foundation of medical ethics is informed consent, right? And patient autonomy. So how do you mandate a vaccination on people when they should have autonomy to decide? So the benefit to me was a lot of patients called me crying saying, "Hey, will you take me? I'm not vaccinated." I'm like, "Come on in." I don't discriminate against my patients. That's a personal medical decision. I'll talk to you about the risk and benefits, but I'm not going to turn my back on you if you smoke or if you eat too many cookies, right? I'll try to help you and do the best I can. Sometimes it may not be a good fit, but we have an obligation, and to discuss the risk and benefits. And in California, we had AB 2098, which led to my exodus from California, because
yeah,
you're not allowed to talk about the risk, only the benefits. And you go, that's unethical. That's a Nuremberg violation. So you look at that and you think, gosh, how can we have pushed this on the doctors? And so many of the doctors behind the scenes would talk to me about, "Oh my gosh, this is crazy what we're doing, isn't it?" But they wouldn't say anything publicly.
yeah, that chilling effect that they've had on doctors speaking out. It's funny how it only went one way. When a So as I started trying to do public service announcements with doctors, especially in New York, in April and May of 2020, I consistently, part of my message was, can I help you? How can I help tell your story? And the other part was, can you tell me what you're seeing? And I even tried to set up a covert system for doctors to provide me with footage or testimony about things that they were being silenced on. Because hospitals were threatening doctors and nurses, don't take any pictures of the ICU, don't say anything about what's going on, almost as if they were trying to pull off a trick, right? So I wanted to see what are they really talking about. We'd see these sort of curiously provocative videos of body bags being thrown in the backs of trucks in New York, but we had no context and we had no way to verify if it was true. So all we could do was panic. You had an influencer on like April 6th, 2020, supposedly out of Chicago, I believe, crying about how she was forced to quit because she would refuse to not wear a mask. There was this propaganda that one could say almost seems coordinated. Um, and again, once you realize that this has been used in warfare in the past, if warfare is on the table, a lot of other elements now are also on the table, and that's why that's part of why this film is made, because we have to think more critically about what we were told, and figure out what happened, because this is I think only the most blind people at this point don't know that something has gone very, very wrong in this country.
Well, I think the problem is most of us are so cynical now. I think, look, people are caught red-handed where it's very clear who's funding these studies and who, like Surgisphere, as to my knowledge, no one had any charges pressed against them. No one went to prison.
No.
Like there was no sanctions against the medical journals who published this. And then, for me, I lost nights of sleep when I read about the PCR testing and how, it was submitted on December 22nd, December 23rd is published, and then there's press releases that's next morning. It's like there's no studies in medical history that are published the next day when they receive a manuscript. How do you do
Right.
peer review? Overnight, like in an hour, you reviewed something and looks at all their sources. It's when you see what happened, you think, wow. Then, like you're saying, like a lot of us doctors saying back, go, what do I even trust anymore? When I look at a study, I go, who's funding it? And the other problem we're seeing is a lot of these doctors who are paid off. They'll say, I haven't taken a dime from pharma, but they're taking dimes from millions of dollars sometimes, or hundreds of thousands of dollars from PR firms representing pharma. So it's a money laundering scheme. And you look at that and
Right.
go, wow, do you really believe it? Because I get it. If you believe in our product, this, I have
Yeah.
two products that sponsor this podcast. They're just paying production costs. And I believe in the product, right? If they were fraudulent, I would never even think about it, having them
Sure.
as a sponsor. So, those kind of things you look at and you go, if that's true for us, then how can it be that pharma is sponsoring every news program in the world? I mean, in the United States, and I think New Zealand also, but I think in New Zealand, from what Callie Means was saying, I think they can't sponsor news programs, but they can sponsor the rest of the shows. But here they can sponsor all the news programs.
Yeah, we have to put an end to that. That's got to stop immediately. Now, we have to figure out some other things too. How do you have a robust independent journalist system if there's no way to make money? And in the old days we had newspaper subscriptions, but now, and this is something that one of the major news aggregate systems that are local around the nation has told me, is that their biggest problem is that Chinese websites will immediately copy their work and pub it out for free. So they could lose money to that. It's a challenge. I don't know the solution. I'm working on it myself. How do we feed ourselves? And this was part of what we used to have when we did have local newspapers, was we had classified ads. We had, and you still have it in some instances, where city councils, local government, will pay newspapers and other entities like that to publish public notices. But we don't even really have obituaries now, and that's a real issue, because there's a lot of identity fraud going on. We have issues with the master death file that the federal government makes through the Social Security Administration. At some point, they stopped taking state-level data from the states to populate their death files. I don't even know how that's being operated anymore. And then that bleeds into a whole lot of other issues that surround the identity and identity theft world. So, we've got a lot of problems. We've got to fix some of the most urgent ones, and that may be medical first. I don't know. I know that we have fraudulent doctors coming in from overseas with fake medical degrees, and that's been an issue. We did a story on that. There was one in Ohio who was supposedly a spinal surgeon, and he was the biggest biller for the hospital. So the hospital system didn't want to do anything to him. But he would tell people, "Oh, if you don't get this surgery, your head is going to fall off." And they believed him, and they would get it. There would be all these surgical disasters because he wasn't a doctor. And when he was finally brought up on charges, after a lot of whistleblower doctors spoke out, and they were censored and silenced for saying anything, because he was a golden egg-laying goose. He fled the country, went back to Pakistan, I think.
Yeah, and you see these stories over and over again, and how the medical community covers for each other. I have friends who reported each other, doctors for impaired, using drugs, and because they made enough money for the hospital, no one did anything about it. And the doctor who reported him got his hours cut. Right. So he got
Right.
penalized for doing the right thing. And so you see that a lot, and you see the systemic corruption, and and it's hard because doctors, we want to fly under the radar, and our nature is to be a safe bet. We're not investing in stocks, and saying, "Oh, I'm going to take a chance and roll the dice." You go, "No, I have to have a sure bet to go into this." So the problem is, when someone tells you in a position of authority, you accept it as truth, and people weren't doing their own research. And the people who did their own research said, "Wait, you can't make statements saying there's no long-term ill effects from a vaccine when we have no long-term data. You can't make that." But all these people who made the guarantee, you're right, it only goes one way. The people who questioned it got crucified, and the ones who gave false statements, like there's a clip that keeps coming up with this doctor says 100% effective, no one gets sick if they get this ever, and they never end up in the hospital. They, it even decreases your risk of cancer and all this other stuff that there was never any studies on this. And when you see that and you think, how can those videos still be up on YouTube? But the
Right.
ones telling factually correct, inconvenient facts are taken down. Or the other thing that was always even on Twitter and X now is you get these community notes, or you have these, where they come up and they're totally wrong in what they're saying. Is like, how is this community note when they're told they don't understand the science at all? One of them, which being that natural immunity is not true, or like, for the history of medicine has been true that once you get the flu, you don't get a flu shot. You already had
Right.
it this year,
So, so where this, I don't know where it gets fixed exactly, but I do believe criminal penalties for scientific fraud might need to start. People got to go to jail. I mean, you think about that Harvard scientist that was leaking secrets, I guess, or working with Chinese entities. And he was also had a contract with the federal government, the Department of Defense, I think. And he was a Harvard chemistry professor, if I'm not mistaken. He really got off almost scot-free. A minimum fine, had to pay some back taxes, maybe like 6 months in house arrest. And trust me, I'm sure he did not live in a slum. That house arrest is probably pretty great.
So what do you say? So what do you, from your film and what you're doing, what do you see as the outcome, the preferred outcome, or what's your goal? Just to educate people, to get them on track? I mean, reform the system. What are your goals?
Well, in the Book of Esther, they impaled a guy on a pole. I don't know if we're going to go that far, but there's there has to start being teeth again to crime and punishment. I mean, we're punishing the wrong people in this country, and it's frightening in a lot of ways. But if anything, it pisses me off more and makes me keep fighting. I think people like Peter Hotez, who have said, anything that the pharmaceutical wind blows that tell him to say, he'll say it, and he will dead eye it, and he will just say a lie, and then go right back to pruning his weeds or whatever he does when he's not wearing his bow tie on CNN. I've never seen anyone, or I've very rarely seen someone who can just put out a false piece of information as an expert and just walk away. Even Fauci occasionally laughs at his own lies.
Well, these guys, when you put all their statements next to each other and they play them in a row, you think, oh my gosh, one vax will do it. 1982. Oh, it was always going to be a 5 shot. So like they change their tune and everyone loves them and they think that they're the world experts, and it's amazing. If you
Right.
look at what they said, that's like me saying masks don't work. Yes, they do work. Yeah, wear 5 masks, don't wear a mask. You go, this guy's an idiot. He has no idea. He's all over the place. So it's like not even consistent in the messaging, and the messaging changed consistently along the line. And it's one of those things where you see it, and like working in the intensive care unit, you see like, oh, this person had a major stroke. So you prepare the family for what's coming and say, okay, look, here's the first thing we're gonna have to do is put them on the ventilator. Next thing is going to be, the trach tube, then a feeding tube. And so you have to expect these things down the road. And some people will go, okay, I'm not doing all that. Nah, but the problem is a lot of times they're not told what's coming and they don't say, yeah, there's 0% chance of recovery. So sometimes it's not the most pleasant news, but we have to be honest. And I think that's where the medical community has lost a lot of credibility, and is that we're not taken as honest anymore.
1 second, I need to switch cameras. My camera
Oh yeah,
overheated.
no problem. I'll pause it
Pause for a
here.
second.
Hey Jack, we'll cut this part out. So where do we go from here?
Um, well, first, I think everyone should go to epidemicoffraud.com and watch the film. For now, we're going to let people who register for my website see it. However, I will say that we may take it off at some point because we are putting it in film festivals, and some film festivals don't want films to be online. And I can tell you that one film festival has gotten back to us, and they're going to create it like they're going to make it like a headline film to watch, and they're very, very excited about it. I was a little shocked how happy they were because when you put something out like this, it could generate a negative response.
Oh, I would
But
expect it. I mean, you couldn't have put this out a year ago. Right,
no,
you couldn't have. There's no way you could have done it. So that's one positive thing. I think that a lot more people are open minded to say, let me listen to what these guys are saying. Even if they don't agree, they can listen and say, okay, let me look into this. Right.
yeah,
Let me do my own research, or let me talk to world experts. And I have the fortune of, having these podcasts where I could talk to the world experts behind the scenes and go, what's going on? What are you seeing? What's happening? And so I have a finger on the pulse that people don't, the general population is not going to have. And I
right.
happen to have friends who've been on the right side of history every single time. I know their character and integrity, because they all know it's like it was political suicide and career suicide. If you were wrong, if you stood up and were wrong, people, there are a lot of people that I know that I really admire, because I knew they were going against the fire. They were like swimming, that one salmon swimming up the stream, against the tide. And there was such huge pressure on people. I felt it, and we all felt it. But it's like, you got to tell it. And I think for a guy like you coming out, and again, I respect that, because you're self-funding this thing. And if people want to help you, how do they donate, to help you do more work like this, and FOIA requests, and bring out more truth to people?
So there are a couple of different ways. If you want to help fund the marketing of the film and the actual film itself, you can donate at epidemicoffraud.com, or you can donate to Broken Truth. That's our nonprofit that's set up, and that goes to that effort to funding the film and maybe some production costs. If you want to help me, you could reach out through the website, and I'm not sure how this gets. I think what I'd like this to be is a series, because there are a lot more important details that need to come out, not just about what's covered in this story. This story is a bit like a pilot for a series. There's much more that we could talk about with remdesivir. We could really dig into the hospital systems and how their sort of globalist control have caused such damage in patient care, and even hospital billing and ICD-10 codes and everything else. It's not like McDonald's where you walk in and there's a menu of what you can do. People are unaware of what they're even going to be charged until later. That seems grossly unfair, especially when you're dealing with something like sort of subjective tests.
Well, I had someone on the podcast. I've had several people that were vax injured or they lost someone, a family member. And you look at the ramifications and the costs, and some of those after, insult to injury, they sustain an injury, they get hospitalized and they get a $400,000 bill on
Right.
top of that. And it's like, and no one's going to help you. And you can't go after
Right.
the pharma companies because they're exempts, right? So it's one of those things that was just such a hard thing. So having people like you, I know Paul Thacker's has rocked the boat a few times, and
Mm.
uh, just so many other journalists that I see out there that are, man, they're going against they're up against it. I don't know how they get their information, the FOIA requests, and how much gaslighting there is trying just to get info. I just want information on this topic, and how you just get blocked. And so you did a great job of putting a lot of science in there, a lot of just backing up what you're saying. And I think that's so critical, especially you really have to, because there's a lot of nasty people who don't want you to get this message out.
And it's so sad, really. I didn't want to make this. This message should have been public knowledge from the beginning. And in one of my exchanges with the FDA, I told them, I said, if you really want to ever have any sort of public confidence in your institution, you should fund me. You should pay me to find flaws. A little bit like uh, a security expert testing a computer system.
Yeah, you audit my books, right?
Yeah, let me find the bugs.
Yeah.
Uh, they didn't even respond to that, and it was maybe they thought it was a joke, but I'm not really kidding. I mean, as you'll see in this movie, I've had some pretty hardcore interaction with the FDA, to the point where one announced her resignation a few days later, or retirement, early retirement. So that's a this kind of work can maybe have effects, and I like you can't always prove a vaccine injury, even though it's pretty obvious the timing. I can't prove that I forced someone to resign from the FDA. Obviously, they made their own decisions for their own life, but I can't imagine, especially when you hear the email that I sent, that it didn't weigh in with they, especially because I said that this was an upcoming documentary.
Yeah. And your document, I don't want to give the ending away, but it ends very powerfully with a song and clips, and you go, oh my gosh, that just infuriated me too. I just watching these things, you go, gosh, dang
Yeah.
it, the arrogance, and so you do a good job of tying together relationships. Like this person happened to be with this company, and they passed this thing, and then they get promoted. And when you see the corruption, it's almost like you don't even want to know. It's hard to imagine. And so things I've read and that I've experienced, it's just like you don't want to know. You want to think. I think for most of us, it's hard to imagine that there's evil people out there that would harm people to get profit, or to gain the world, or to gain power, whatever it might be. But I think we have to wake up to these things now.
What is it? 1 in 10 women has borderline personality disorder. So, I mean, if you expand that out to other personality disorders, I don't know what the total scale of it is, but what percentage would you say are narcissists? 1 in 10?
Oh yeah. Well, in medicine, it's gonna be a lot higher of a percentage than that. We talked about that before
ten,
we
10 in
started.
one.
Like, yeah, like how many letters are after your name? Then I don't listen to you unless you have PhD, FACP and all these kind of things.
Sure.
But common sense and like just hard work. And then what you did is looking, untying things and looking, going, this doesn't make sense. Let me look into it, and doing that for other people, and presenting the sources that they can go look at. So that your film is very powerful from that standpoint. And also, I know you're a man of faith. So how does your faith guide you in all this stuff? And how did faith work into this movie?
Um, at one point, things just seemed to connect for me in a way that felt like there was a guiding hand in the universe pointing me at places. Um, and initially, I mean, I've always had faith, but it was much more, I would say, subdued. I definitely didn't really talk about it. You live in Hollywood, you're sort of agnostic, and I have been critical of organized religion in the past. I've seen it get sort of taken hostage by egos, and we it's difficult to know where to go. So my faith is typically more personal. You know, people contact me and they want to have group prayers and whatever, and I don't pray publicly too often because for me it's a little bit like letting somebody in my bedroom.
Mhm.
It's very personal, right? Like listen to me talk to my best friend. So
Mhm.
so with that in mind, I can tell you that some things that happened were really interesting. The way I learned about the history of hydroxychloroquine, especially the John Wilkes Booth stuff, what really predicated that whole story that you'll see in the film was discovered after climbing down a cliff at Pismo Beach and sitting out for a few hours at night under the moon and stars, just sort of praying, meditating, talking to God, thinking about things. And the Civil War was weighing heavily on my mind, Abraham Lincoln, and even John Wilkes Booth. And I'd already dealt with the hydroxychloroquine situation in 2020, the fall of 2020, trying to help doctors connect to patients and then connect those patients to pharmacies that would mail hydroxychloroquine to the patients in states where it was being restricted. So trying that process and going through that, I felt a little bit like an undercover, like Batman or something. And and then I come into the hotel room, my family's asleep, and I just pull up John Wilkes Booth. And I knew hydroxychloroquine didn't exist in the 1800s, so I looked up quinine. And that's when I saw this incredible story that John Wilkes Booth was a smuggler of this drug is very similar to what I was trying to help people have access to. And I'm like, suddenly I'm associated with this nefarious villain of history. And then I learned that the reason why I did it was because Abe Lincoln was restricting access. And I was like, well, that's kind of like biological warfare. Wow. That was a really shocking thing. And there's a lot of history behind how I even got up to Pismo that night. And to begin with, I had to sort of abandon a project for a client, and they had wanted me to promote the vaccine and Fauci and whatever, and I couldn't do it. And it just put me in this traumatic experience because I knew now I couldn't work for these networks. And this was also at the time right after Biden had come into office, and they were putting out billions of dollars to propagandize the country.
Yeah, because
So
you could have
that,
just jumped on that ship, by the way. You could have just jumped on that and made money hand over
yeah,
fist.
I mean, I could have, but
That darn
uh,
integrity thing gets in the way all the time, doesn't it?
yeah, except when you want to pay your home mortgage with it, the bank does not take integrity bills.
Yeah, they don't do that. That's right.
But to that end, I mean, I was definitely led to that point. Had all of the events not occurred, I wouldn't have been on the beach that night. I would have been sort of dwelling on that and found that information, which led me to continue to research all of the other history of hydroxychloroquine. And there's even more that I don't cover.
Fascinating. It's fascinating research. I had no idea. I had no idea about all that. I was shocked by that. So
Yeah,
it's
it was.
great. It's really worth watching people if you want to learn history and go, wow, there's a lot to these things. Honest Dave wasn't so honest a couple of times, I guess.
Well, it was war. I mean, I think they even did that in certain things like with smallpox. They wanted people to get in the Revolutionary War. I mean, there were efforts on all sides to kill each other however you could. It's war. And we have to remember in war the gloves come off. You apologize later as long as you win.
Well, and that's a scary thing is when that people just don't realize history, and that's why it's so critical. Because you even talked about when that they were trying to get the mosquitoes to um, spread disease to the enemies, and then sometimes it comes back on you, right? And then you see Bill Gates making all these mosquitoes, like billions of mosquitoes he's going to release everyone. Like, I don't think this is a good idea, guys. I don't
Yeah,
think this is a
this
good idea to intervene.
the hubris of science right now is astounding. Um, Maybe we shouldn't fund all these bad ideas. And you could people want to paint Bill Gates as this evil madman. And certainly he's not funding always the best things, but you could also understand if you've got tens of billions of dollars, who's going to tell you no? Who's going to say, maybe this is a crappy idea?
Yeah.
Maybe we
Well,
shouldn't be
just pay
putting
us and we'll
rockets
find
on
out.
rattles. Yeah, maybe we
Yeah.
shouldn't be taping rockets to rattlesnakes and shooting them in the schoolyards. Like, I don't know. Maybe that's a bad idea. Like,
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no,
uh,
that's a hard thing. Money does talk, and they always say follow the money, and you do, and you go, I wonder why this would be. Oh, okay. Emergency
yeah,
use declaration, all these kind of things. And we start understanding what we're up against. It's overwhelming, but I think it's guys like you come out and kind of ruffle some feathers and do your thing and say, here's the data, argue with
sure.
me, and I think that's why a lot of these things didn't go to court because they knew they would get it handed to them when they do
Right.
the right when they start looking at discovery and they go, here's the evidence. They just want the threat so that you don't talk and then they'll back down if when things get really serious.
Well, and it's that points to an issue that we have with our judiciary right now. Why are so many cases prevented from going to trial by judges? Why are judges in like they're inserting themselves in the justice system in a way that prevents anyone from getting certain messages out? That's really concerning. I mean, you have states like Missouri that were able to push through certain trials, but a lot of states have had judges unnecessarily prevent discovery. That's a real issue. That is a major issue. And
Yeah, there's so
I,
much. You got a lot of work to do. You got a lot of work to do. I think you got a lot of stuff to uncover,
I know.
but it's good to have these ideas, to look and go, okay, let's look at why is this happening and understanding the history and understanding, the motives and the means and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So, John, what's life's best medicine for you, man? I got to ask you since you're on this podcast, like what motivates you? What gets you out of bed? Where do you get fired up? What would you say to your kids is important in life? What matters?
Um, Listening to your soul, listening to that, conscience that tells you that something's wrong. That's important. Uh, Letting God speak to you through people and help you uh, when you're uncertain. That doesn't mean you have to listen to every single person that says things to you, but you can find grains of truth in just everyday encounters. It's been really miraculous for me to just stay open to the messages of the universe. Um, the story about the history of hydroxychloroquine includes a dogwood tree reference, and doctors didn't want to use it because they didn't want to use the bark from it because they hadn't had enough clinical trials, and that was like 1865 or whatever. Who would have said that? I thought that was a joke. But it leads to the parable of the dogwood tree, which, by the way, is I'll preface this and say that this is not scientifically legitimate. It's just sort of a fun thing somebody in the South, I think, came up with. And the parable of the dogwood tree is that allegedly Jesus was crucified on the cross made from a dogwood tree. And at the time, dogwood trees were much thicker and bigger and usable for wood furniture. And as he was being taken to the mount, he touched one of a dogwood tree and told it that it would never be used for that sort of burden again. And from then on, dogwood trees were wiry and not really usable for anything other than just, making flowers.
Hmm.
And also after that, the flowers of the dogwood tree showed up in the shape of a cross, a Jerusalem type cross. And on the edges of the dogwood flower petal are little nail holes, rusty looking nail holes where he was supposedly as a reminder that he was nailed to the cross. That is why the Broken Truth logo, the T, has a dogwood flower in it. It's a reminder to me not only about that story, but also that medical doctors aren't always right. No offense.
Yeah, we've been known to. That's what we call it, practicing medicine. We're still
Yeah,
trying to figure it out,
I
but
mean it's
hopefully we do it
literally in
honestly.
yeah, the flowers in the shape of the healthcare cross on your shirt.
Yeah.
So
We'll try
go
to figure
now.
it out, man.
Yeah, everybody's homework is to go look up the parable of the dogwood tree. I'll tell you that the dogwood tree didn't exist in the Middle East, whatever, back then. So it's a story that my mom told me when I was a little kid, and that coming across that bit of information that night after I'd been on the beach just blew my mind. I was like, okay, I'm not being hacked. I've never told anybody this story. So something else is pushing me.
Yeah, awesome stuff, man. And thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
And everyone, thanks for listening.
And by the
Epidemic
way, yeah,
of Fraud.
epidemic of fraud, and you can sign up at brokentruth.com, uh, brokentruth.com,
All
and
right,
you'll get
awesome.
a link and a password to watch the film.
Yeah, and it's well worth watching. It's well worth watching. I was, some a lot of the docs who've been on this podcast and maybe got taken down for medical misinformation
Hmm.
were in it, and they did a great job. So,
Yeah,
it's really worth watching. And be kind to yourself, be kind to others. And I think John's giving some great advice. If something doesn't seem right, question it. Stand up and say, this may not be popular, but I don't agree with these things. We're seeing a lot of things in our society that personally we don't agree with, but it's not politically correct, and we're afraid to get angry neighbors and friends and things like that. But stick to your guns. Have integrity in that, and try to be reasonable. Don't be hateful, but trust your gut. Trust yourself, and do your research.
absolutely.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you for listening to this episode. We greatly appreciate your support. We would greatly appreciate a positive thumbs up on all of the platforms like iTunes and Spotify or wherever you're listening. And we just thank you for our Patreon supporters. We greatly appreciate your help in getting this message out. We think there's a lot of important information, and hopefully this helps you. Have a great day, and thank you for listening, and thank you for your support.